Pac-Man is all about getting a high score, has been from the very beginning, and that's no different in the series' first 3D platformer, Pac-Man World. Everything gives you points, from collecting dots and fruits to killing enemies. On top of that, there are even more ways to score points in the game's remake, Pac-Man World Re-Pac. But what if we flipped Pac-Man on its head and tried to not get any points at all? This is the Pac-Man World Re-Pac Minimum Score Challenge. Before we get started, yes, this is my first challenge video. I don't plan on making these a consistent thing for my channel. I'll do them from time to time if I have an interesting or unique idea, but reviews are still the main focus. As for why I'm tackling the remake instead of the PS1 original, that game already has an own minimum score. It's even got its own leaderboard on the speedrun.com page. The answer for the original game is 0. You can get 0 points. While it could still make for an interesting video to show off the route and the strats involved in that run, I'd be doing little more than copying someone else's work in terms of the routing, and I wanted to do something a little more unique than that. The remake offers a good opportunity to take what I know about the original and apply it to a new version that changes quite a bit, especially in the scoring system. Speaking of which, what all do we need to avoid for this run? Well, like I said earlier, collectibles will all give you points, such as pack dots, power pellets, fruits, letters, etc., as well as defeating the game's various enemies, like the ghosts, bats, aliens, and so on. Additionally, the remake adds a new bonus system, giving you extra points at the end of the level for every dot and fruit that you had, as well as some extra points for enemies killed, and a bonus for beating the level without dying. There's also a slot machine that automatically activates, giving you 1 spin for every token you pick up throughout the level, and matching out fruits will give you some bonus points. Finally, Easy Mode. This remake adds an Easy Mode which adds some extra platforms over pits and lets Pac-Man infinitely flutter, which would actually be really helpful in parts of this run, but it also doesn't save your score. Technically, you can beat the entire game with 0 points by just turning on Easy Mode at the start of every level and just playing the game normally, but that's not really in the spirit of the challenge, so I'm banning it. There are some Easy Mode exclusive strats, but given the lack of a score when you use it, those strats won't be allowed unless there's a way of doing them without the Easy Mode. That's basically everything we're going to be avoiding throughout this run: dots, fruits, enemies, the slot machine, and the end of level bonuses. That no miss bonus is a bit tricky though, because even if you die a couple of times, you'll still get a bonus, just a smaller one than you would get if you didn't die at all. To get rid of the no miss bonus completely, you'd have to die at least 10 times in a level. Later on, that's not an issue, as we can easily grind lives by grabbing a 1-up in a stage, exiting the level, and going back in to grab it again, over and over until we have the 10 we need to skip the no miss bonus. When you start the game though, you only have 4 lives, and the first level only has a single 1-up in it. So does that mean we're forced to take a small no miss bonus in this stage? Well, surprisingly enough, no actually. This is where things get a bit technical. See, extra lives will immediately carry over if you exit a level, making them easy to grind. There's a bit of an issue with that strategy here in the first level though, since you can't actually exit to the hub world until you've already completed this level. There is one last hope for us though, since extra lives will save to your file before you finish a level, but only once you grab a checkpoint. That's when it updates. Fortunately for us, there's a checkpoint right after the extra life in the first level, so it's just a matter of grabbing the 1-up, collecting the checkpoint, closing and reopening the game, and loading the file with the extra life saved to it. Now we just repeat this process until we have at least 10 lives, and we can finally finish the first level. As for the actual route of this level, it's fairly straightforward. There are some dots placed along these ramps, but they can be easily avoided by climbing up on the sides, and other than that, there's basically nothing in the way you'd have to avoid here. That means Buccaneer Beach is an easy 0 points. Off to a good start. The next level, Corsair's Cove, thankfully has a 1-up placed much closer to the start of the level, so this will be a good place to grind for lives before each level. And yeah, you have to do this before every single level, so get used to the grinding. Before we actually play the level, I have to recommend making a backup save. I did this before playing every level, that way if I accidentally grabbed a dot after wasting my lives, I could just exit the level and load the backup save, then save over top of the other save slot, and I wouldn't have to go back and grind lives multiple times for the same level. Additionally, if you accidentally get some extra bonus points at the end of the level, you have a backup save you can load to redo the level and fix your mistake. Now that we're ready for Corsair's Cove, it's once again mostly pretty easy, with not much placed directly in your way. There's one part where you have to swim underwater where there are some pack dots placed along the path, but you can easily avoid them just by swimming diagonally towards the 4th wall. You do get kind of stuck at this orange door, which hides a switch that moves this upper platform back and forth, allowing you to cross. Fortunately though, we can skip all of that by simply butt bouncing on this barrel and ledge grabbing the platform above. Now we just get to the end of the level and we're home free. Oh right. This statue has a special property where it can only be destroyed by this cannon over here, which can only be activated by hitting this switch, which is locked behind a door that requires a fruit to open. All of that means that if we want to actually finish this level, we have no choice but to grab this banana, netting us an additional 500 points. As if that wasn't bad enough, the banana is hidden in a chest underwater surrounded by Pac dots, meaning you have to precisely land right in the center where you can grab the banana without also picking up any of the dots, which is a bit harder than it looks due to the awkward camera angle. Those 500 points aren't all we're getting though, as we also have the fruit bonus at the end of the level, giving us 100 extra points per fruit. Even though we used the fruit to open the door, it still gets counted toward the fruit bonus, bringing our total for this level to 600 points. That means the 0 point challenge is officially failed, making this a minimalist run. That's fine, I knew going in there would be at least some points we can't avoid, but one required fruit for this level is still pretty solid. Moving on to Crazy Cannonade, we get our first taste of some real precision movement. We have to cross this gap by bouncing on these cannon covers while they're up, but there are Pac dots placed on top. First of all, I lured this skeleton off the edge to get it out of the way while I line this up. Then I line up Pac-Man's foot with the flooring using the D-pad to guarantee perfect movement, and just hope that I time my jumps perfectly so that I can bounce off the corners without grabbing the dots. Once you get to the second platform, you can bounce straight over to the floor on the other side. A little bit later, we have to do basically the same thing again, but just like last time, you can get straight to the floor on the other side by bouncing from the second platform. From there, the rest of the level is pretty smooth sailing, and we finish with a minimum of 0 points. Now we take on the first boss, HMS Windbag, and right off the bat things do not look good. Fortunately though, we can avoid all the Pac dots in the center and bottom of this path by hugging the top wall, and then switching to the bottom when there's a line of dots along the top. There's one really tough jump where you have to butt bounce along the top edge from the very end of this platform, fluttering at just the right time to skip this platform and reach the next one with a ledge grab. Fortunately, the fruit here isn't an issue if you just hug the top wall. From there, just follow a strict path and you can avoid getting any points in this section. Don't forget that you still have to waste 10 lives before you finish each level, and the boss itself doesn't have any midway checkpoints, so you have to do it either at the start of the level or just before the boss fight. As for the fight itself, we have a little problem. Whenever you hit the boss, he'll spawn a fruit. That doesn't seem like a big deal since we can easily avoid it, but after the 5th and 10th hits, you're locked into a cutscene and placed directly in the center of the stage, right where the fruit drops, and you collect it during the cutscene. Sometimes though, depending on when you hit him, he won't spawn anything at all, but I can't seem to get this to happen consistently, at least not in the first phase. If you manage to do this for 1 out of the 5 hits in the first phase, the 4th item he spawns will always be a token. While I usually try to avoid the tokens, you can just make sure not to match any fruits and you won't get any points, so it's not a dead run if you grab one. It might be a good idea to come into this level with a few extra lives so that once you're doing attempts you can die to restart if you don't get a hit with no fruit. Once you get past the first phase, it gets a lot easier since you can guarantee that Windbag won't spawn any fruit if you hit him during this dash attack that he does. Just make sure that your final hit is during this attack and you'll be fine. After each boss dies, you're showered in dots and fruits, giving you one final thing to avoid, and Windbags is one of the hardest to dodge. Just head to the left side and butt bounce and flutter at just the right time and you'll dodge everything. Alright, I finally beat Windbag. I did grab a couple extra tokens while testing before my actual run, but it's fine, I can just make sure not to match anything. Melon fever. Lovely, now I get to do all of that all over again. Thankfully, I managed to get a run with no fruit on the 5th hit this time, so I didn't have to worry about any slots. I have no idea what causes these fevers to trigger. I'm pretty sure there's an element of randomness to it. Maybe you wouldn't get the melon fever if you only had 1 token instead of 3. I don't know, but at least I got another good run before too long. You do get an unavoidable 1,000 points for beating Windbag though. All of the bosses are going to come with a base amount of points for beating the boss itself, but if we can optimize out any extra points, that's a win in my book. That gives us a minimum of 1,000 points on HMS Windbag, bringing our total to 1,600. Now we move on to World 2, the Ruins World, starting with Crisis Cavern. Right off the bat, we're forced to grab a Pac dot when bouncing off this bedoing pad. I tried several different methods to quickly get away from the dot after bouncing up, with no luck, and there doesn't seem to be any ledges high enough to get around this jump. The closest thing I could find is this wall back here, but there's actually an invisible wall that extends much higher up, so getting on top of this is impossible, sadly. That means we've got no choice but to take our first Pac dot. A tip for this run, by the way, whenever you're forced to pick up a Pac dot, make sure to throw it. Any dots that you have saved up will be counted for 10 additional points each in the dot bonus at the end of the stage. We can't do anything to mitigate the fruit bonus, but the dot bonus is completely avoidable so long as you remember to throw them before finishing the level. Anyway, we're almost immediately hit with another roadblock, a thin pathway covered in Pac dots. Get used to narrowly dodging the massive hitboxes of these things, by the way, because this is not the last time the game will throw a section like this at you. As far as this first one goes, it's actually pretty easy, since there's a small spot you can stand on the left side of this platform here, and it's a simple jump to the next area from here. Shortly after, there's another similar section, but this one is thankfully also pretty easy, since you can just aim for the areas where the rocks fall, since there are no dots underneath them. Do make sure not to get hit by the rocks though, as that could easily send you straight into a dot. These jumps are a little tight, but not too difficult. Make sure to hug the top wall in this underground area to avoid the dots, and you'll make it through this section pretty easily. Once we get to the waterfall, we hit another roadblock. To continue on with the level, we have to open this pathway by pressing this switch, which is locked behind a banana door. That means yet another required fruit. As far as I know, there is no currently known way to skip this section at all, so that's an additional 500 points. This spider really tried to troll me by making me bounce on him while I was trying to hit the switch, so I had to lure him out first. The rest of the level is a straight shot to the end, where I nearly ended the level without wasting my 10 lives to avoid the no miss bonus, but thankfully I remembered at the last second. After completing the level, we get a 100 point fruit bonus, making the minimum score in Crisis Cavern 605 points, bringing our total to 2205. Welcome to Manic Mines, or as I like to call it, Hell! This is one of the hardest levels in this entire challenge. It starts off not too bad with these rails that have dots lined up above them, but you can avoid these all pretty easily by walking on the very edge of the platform. Some more wall hugging and ledge walking later, we get to this section that offers very little room to stand. Fortunately, there are a few platforms with just falling rocks and no dots that we can use to get to the other side. There's nothing else of interest until we get to this water section, where hugging the top wall will once again solve all of our problems. Next is a short vertical climb with nothing to worry about, but once you reach the top is where the real challenge of this level begins. This is the last checkpoint of the level, so you're forced to do the entire level up to this point as well as all 10 deaths before even attempting what comes next, so every attempt is a major time investment. Once you've done all that, get ready for some of the most precise jumps in this entire challenge. You have to perfectly land on the very corners to avoid the dots while also timing each jump so that you don't get shot down by this flamethrower in the background. I highly recommend grinding out a few extra lives past the 10 you already get before going into this level, as that gives you some wiggle room after wasting the initial 10 lives. It's better to miss a jump and die but get to try again than to accidentally grab a pack dot and have to restart the entire level. Also, once again, don't forget to have a backup save so you don't have to grind lives again either. The route that I found to safely get through this section starts with a jump to the top right corner of this block here, then to the middle of these 3 blocks up here, followed by the hardest jump all the way to the very edge of this platform, and finally to the top edge between these 2 blocks. Once you land here, it's a straight shot to safety. Getting all 4 of these jumps in a row without grabbing a dot is incredibly difficult, requiring perfect positioning on your landings and good timing to avoid the flamethrower. It took me 3 hours to get through this section just a single time, and the level doesn't just end after that either, so don't choke. Another 20 minutes later, I finally got through this hell section again and managed to not screw up the end of the level this time. This last part isn't even that hard, just aim for the center of where these rocks fall between these dots and you'll be fine. For some reason, when I finally did beat the level, the end screen showed enemy score 3, even though I didn't kill any enemies. It didn't give me any points for it, so it didn't matter, but still, no idea what happened there. After a grueling 3.5 hour grind spread across 2 days, I beat Manic Mines with 0 points. Now that that's over, we move on to the boss of the Ruins world, Anubis Rex. The first section of the fight has you running away from this mummy hand while avoiding traps and hazards, as well as all these dots and fruits. Fortunately, the collectibles are placed just sparingly enough that you can avoid everything with some careful jumps, though the added time pressure of the mummy chasing you doesn't make it any easier. The section right at the end kept eating my jump inputs, which was kind of annoying, but I eventually made it out alive and without any points in hand. It's not a huge deal if you have to tank some hits to make it through this part, since you have to waste your 10 lives afterwards anyways. Once you've done that, get ready for Phase 2, the actual boss fight. The hardest part of this boss is honestly just not dying to the second phase. You have to rev these 4 pads 4 times each while avoiding more and more attacks with less and less ground to stand on as the fight progresses. On top of that, the only way to get extra health in this fight is to kill enemies, which we can't do. There are no checkpoints either, so you have to one-shot the entire boss fight. Most of the attacks are very obviously telegraphed and pretty easy to dodge, but the laser he shoots in the final phase has a massive hitbox, so don't be afraid to just get out of there well before the laser comes out if you're low on health. Patience is the key to easily beating this boss. After the boss is defeated, you're showered with dots and fruits just like the last boss, but these are much easier to avoid if you just stand back here. Once again, the points the boss gives you when you defeat it are unavoidable, so that's an extra 1500 points to the total score, bringing it to 3705. Next up is World 3, the Space World, starting with Space Race. Just in case the hell you endured in Manic Mines wasn't bad enough, Space Race is just as bad. Right at the start is a wall of lasers and a ramp to get over it that's covered in Pac dots. Fortunately, you can just damage boost straight through the lasers, or jump clean over it if you're really good. But then we get really stuck. This yellow switch opens the door ahead, but it's being guarded by this alien enemy. Obviously, we don't want to kill the enemy, but we still have to press the switch to move on. There's no other way around it. Fortunately, you can just barely bounce the switch by baiting out an attack from the enemy, then quickly positioning Pac-Man in just the right spot where you can then jump and time a flutter just before you land on the ground, allowing you to activate the switch with a butt bounce without killing the enemy. This maneuver is really finicky, as the positioning is very strict, the timing on the flutter and bounce are pretty tight, and you have to make sure the enemy isn't attacking when you do it, as its hitbox increases while it's spinning around. Be prepared to do this trick a lot too, as this is another highly reset-heavy level. There's a couple tight jumps to skip some ramps and more enemies to avoid, but nothing too difficult until you get to this section. You have to hit this blue 1 switch to hit the 2 switch below, which then opens the door to the next section of the level. But the 1 switch lowers the floor and spawns a bunch of Pac dots. If you're fast, you can go straight from hitting the button to this bottom left corner here, and then jump over the platform to the top left corner below, while making sure to hug the wall so you don't accidentally grab the dot up there. From there, it's a simple jump to the next laser platform and then to the 2 switch. Now this next section is where it gets really hard. Much like Manic Mines, this is the last checkpoint in the level, so you have to waste all 10 of your lives before even attempting the actually hard part, and the rest of the level leading up to this point isn't nearly as trivial as it was in Manic Mines, so it's a real time investment here. Be careful to avoid these enemies, as managing your health is pretty important in this next section. The goal is to first land on the very bottom left corner of the second platform, then jump to the fourth platform where the dot can't be avoided, and finally one long jump to the end, unless you want to do a shorter, easier jump to the left edge of the sixth platform, but that's a little more risky. It may not sound that bad, but this first jump is a real pain in the ass. Once again, I'd recommend bringing in a few extra lives past the required 10 just in case you die to this enemy down here while trying to line up the first jump. This enemy makes this section so much more annoying too. But eventually, I got through Space Race with only 5 points. That may not be the minimum though, as it turns out. While I was writing this run, I was updating the Re-Pac speedrunning community to see if any of them had some extra ideas or better routes than what I had come up with. And someone told me that they were able to get onto the fourth platform without grabbing the dot. I was skeptical at first, but after going back and testing it, it is indeed possible. This would make the jump to the left edge of the sixth platform required, which can be done with a well-positioned ledge grab, but out of 2 hours of attempts, I only managed to get an actual run on top of the fourth platform without grabbing any dots a single time, and of course I messed up the jump afterwards. However, I can confirm that each jump is possible on its own, and the level is theoretically possible with a minimum of 0 points, but I wasn't able to do it in one full run. I really tried, just for the sake of showing you guys the footage, but it's not like I can replace my high score in the file with a lower one, and by the time I found out about this strat I had already gotten to the final world of the game, so it just wasn't really worth the hours of effort it would take to do this. Seriously, this jump to the fourth platform is absolutely ridiculous and feels completely random whether or not it'll work. Like I said, I only managed to do it in a run a single time. I'm gonna ignore the 5 points difference for now, but I will factor it in at the end. For now, Space Race is completed with 5 points, bringing the total to 3710. The Space World does not let up after Space Race though. Far Out is filled with tough obstacles, starting off with another enemy on top of a switch. Before you can even get up to it though, you have to land a precise jump on the corner of this platform to avoid this dot while also avoiding the laser. Then you have to get past the enemy itself. Use the same tactic from the previous level and you can continue on just fine. For whatever reason though, this one felt a lot less consistent than the one in Space Race. I don't know why. Immediately after is a ramp covered in Pac dots, and just jumping across isn't enough to clear the gap. Even if you line Pac-Man up as far upwards as possible to just barely rev across the ramp, you'll still always grab the first 2 dots. So how do we get to the other side of this gap then? Well, after a lot of experimenting, I found you can just barely rev off the corner of the ramp at a precise angle to land on this platform in the background, skipping all 4 dots. It's really precise though. What I found worked best was lining Pac-Man's angle up such that the very tip of his nose is just barely visible. Next up is the hardest part of the level, where you have to clear this massive gap to skip a Pac dot chain. Once again, a simple butt bounce and flutter aren't enough to get you across, but if you line Pac-Man up as far to the right as possible and half charge a rev roll, you might just make it. It is kinda random though, and I only ended up getting it in my successful run after a few tries. As I later found out, there is a bit of tech that makes this easier, where you hold back after rev rolling off an edge and then hold forward again, cancelling the rev and allowing you to flutter, which makes the ledge grab way more consistent. The next section is a vertical climb where you're supposed to take this elevator up while dodging lasers, but there's a bunch of dots in the way, so that's not happening. Instead, you can get some tricky butt bounces on the bottom edges of these platforms to just barely make your way up without the elevator. The rest of the level is thankfully pretty easy, so we're able to be far out with 0 points. Next up is Gimme Space, and now that we're here, we finally have a faster spot to grind for lives, since there's a 1-up placed right at the beginning of the level. That'll definitely help speed things up for the rest of this challenge. The level itself is yet another nightmare, filled with dots blocking your progress. Right off the bat, you have to contend with these tilting platforms covered in dots. You can stand on the fronts and backs of them without grabbing the dots, but this makes moving from one to the next a lot harder. I struggled so much with getting past this beginning section, as you have to cross and ascend up several of these back to back, each of them with dots to avoid. As if that wasn't bad enough, right at the end it tries to force you to bounce up with these beatoing pads, but that'll send you straight into a pack dot, so we have to do these janky jumps to climb up. The beatoings have massive hitboxes too, so you really have to line Pac-Man up carefully before you jump across. Once you're at the top, you can jump across to this next section, but make sure not to skip this checkpoint on the left. After all that nonsense, I would not recommend doing that. This next jump is a bit of a reach, but it's doable. It's what comes after that's really tricky. You can scale the left platforms up until the very top. The last one has a dot on it. The platform on the right looks promising, but it's unfortunately too short to climb up from here. We're gonna have to go up the left side, but this is not an easy dot to avoid. You're gonna want to line Pac-Man up while still on the ground. If you're lined up right, you can just barely grab the very left edge of the platform without grabbing the dot up here. A few more tilting platforms later, we hit the final checkpoint. My dumbass wasn't paying attention while wasting my lives for the no-miss bonus, and I game overed, so that was great. Once I finally got back here again, there's another vertical climb, and the beatoing pads will send you straight into some pack dots, so we're gonna have to find another way up once again. Fortunately, this chest here is in just the right position to butt bounce off of, giving us enough height to grab this ledge. From there, it's a simple matter of bouncing back and forth from platform to platform until we're at the top. At this point, you have to press this switch to make this wall move down into a floor, but once it's set into place, a bunch of pack dots spawn across it. My initial plan was to rev roll across while it was still diagonal, using it as a pseudo ramp to land on the tilting platform on the other side. In my actual run, though... Well, now I'm all the way back down here, the chest is gone, and I gotta figure out how to get across that platform with the dots on it. Turns out you can just stand on top of this beatoing pad without rolling down it, which makes for a fairly simple jump up to the platform above. As for the bridge, there's actually a way easier strategy I completely overlooked. You can bounce across this platform in the foreground between the dots, being extra careful not to kill any of the enemies, ride this plasma ball up to a higher platform, and easily leap to the tilting platforms in the background without needing to activate the switch at all. Given this remake's tendency to spam invisible walls everywhere, I'm surprised there wasn't one here to make this strat impossible. The level ends literally 2 jumps later with a minimum score of 0 points. That just leaves us with the boss of the space world, King Galaxian. I was really worried about this one going in, but it ended up being not too bad. The first section can be pretty stressful, but so long as you don't ever press the shoot button and carefully dodge every enemy and pick up in your path, you'll make it through just fine. Even if you take a few deaths, there are checkpoints littered throughout the auto-scrolling enemy gauntlet, so it's not that bad. I'd recommend wasting your 10 lives on the last checkpoint before the boss fight starts, since dying in the boss itself takes forever. The second portion where you fight the actual boss starts off pretty easy, just shoot out the eyes, but after destroying an eye, he goes into a secondary phase where you have to shoot down his tail to get back to the eyes. This is the part I was worried about. You can get about half the tail's health down at the start, but then he starts infinitely spamming enemies at you. This tail has a lot of health too, and you have to do this tail phase 3 times. I couldn't even make it through the first one. Trying to time shots in between the enemies is really difficult, especially while dodging attacks, and I couldn't even make it through the first one before I game overed and had to restart the entire fight. But just before I died, I accidentally shot down an enemy and noticed something.
Those don't give you points?
In hindsight, it makes sense. These enemies do spawn infinitely, so if they gave you points, you could just sit there grinding them forever to get a theoretically infinite high score. You do still have to be careful though, as for each of the tail phases, one of the enemies will drop a power pellet when killed. Other than that, you can play this portion of the boss fight almost entirely like normal and you'll be fine. There isn't even a flood of dots and fruits at the end to worry about, it just ends. That only leaves us with the 1500 points you get for defeating the boss, and...
420! 420! Dude!
That brings our total to 5210, officially halfway through the game. Clowning around kicks off the fourth world of the game, and it starts off fairly simple. There's pretty much nothing to worry about until we have to climb up this section, but that's pretty easily avoided by hitting this orange switch and running to the right side and climbing up there where there aren't any dots. A little later on, I made this discovery.
I thought you couldn't butt bounce these guys.
That must be like new to the remake. Yeah, you're gonna have to carefully bait these enemies out of your way before hitting the switches here. The rest of the level's a cakewalk. This entire level is really easy, honestly. Probably the easiest level in the entire game. A simple 0 points. Barrel Blast has basically nothing going on besides some simple sections where you just walk towards the foreground up until this lemon door. The switch behind this door makes this platform move up and down, giving us access to the next section of the level, and there's currently no known way to skip this door, so that's a mandatory 800 points. Ouch. I was a little worried about this ramp here, but it's wide enough that you can just rev across up against the foreground and easily skip everything here. I bounced off this chest to skip these stairs, but I don't think that's even necessary, it was just slightly faster. The entire rest of the level is just as trivial as clowning around was. After the fruit bonus, we're left with a minimum score of 900 points, bringing the total to 6110. Spin Dizzy has one of the more interesting routes. To avoid as many unnecessary extra dots as possible, I skipped all of the switches that make the platforms move. This only requires some slightly janky jumps depending on the section, but considering it also prevents the platforms from moving, it makes the level way easier. The only required switch is in this section with the hammers, which does require a few tricky jumps to get to, and once you get there, it spawns a Pac-Dot chain to take you back to the beginning of the section. Simply jump over it and land on this moving platform below, and you can continue on with the level. The rest is pretty straightforward until the vertical climb right at the end, where you have to hit these switches to activate moving platforms, and...
Melon!
Okay, let's try that again. Once you're past this, the level just ends right there, so Spin Dizzy leaves us with a minimum score of 0 points. Clown Pre has Pac-Man face off against 11 clown racers in a first-person racing minigame, and the only thing you really have to worry about are the handful of power pellets laid out throughout the track. You do have to get first place to win the level, but doing so without the power pellets is definitely possible. Pretty easy, actually. The worst part was slowly, tediously burning through the 10 lives by driving off the first cliff in the track over and over and over again. Don't be afraid to take it slow to make sure you don't grab any power pellets during the race, or you're doing that all over again. The race is lenient enough that you can afford to be a little careful and still get first place. Do keep an eye out at the end of the race though, as the game spawns a bunch of stuff in your path to the end of level token. You can just drive around them though. Defeating this boss gives us 2,000 points, which is our minimum score for this level. That brings the total to 8110. Moving on to the factory world, we start with Perilous Pipes, which for some reason has a checkpoint placed 2 seconds into the level. This ramp was a bit awkward to get around due to the placement of an invisible wall, but a butt bounce is enough to easily get us over it. There are a couple more tricky jumps over lines of Pac-Dots, but most of this level is pretty simple. Later on, we come across this ramp covered in dots. Rather than risk it trying to go up the side of the ramp, I just butt bounced across to the top side of this beatoing pad on the right and jumped up the ledge from there. The rest of the level is free, so Perilous Pipes has a minimum score of 0 points. Under Pressure is up next, and it immediately throws this awkward set of stairs at us. It's not impossible to get past, but it sure is janky thanks to this enemy constantly targeting you from the top step. Riding up this platform while chilling out with the torch enemy was pretty funny. Later on, this conveyor has some dots placed along it, but they're so high up that you can just walk right under them. I tried to hug the invisible wall behind this next conveyor belt, but there wasn't one. There is one in the foreground though, so that made it pretty easy to avoid all the dots here. Be careful not to grab this C when jumping down into the water section. The water section itself is pretty easy if you just hug the wall in the background the entire time. Just be careful to avoid the sharks. After the water section is this level's most evil challenge. There's a set of elevators with dots along their path. The first one is skippable, but only while grabbing the last dot in its path. This jump is extremely precise, so I highly doubt it can be done any better to avoid this dot. The right upwards has 5 more dots in its path, and no matter what I tried, I just couldn't manage to get enough height off the elevator to jump out and grab this ledge without also grabbing the Pac-Dot. It might be possible to skip 1 or maybe even 2 of these dots with some really precise maneuvers, but as far as I can tell, 6 dots is the minimum. However, it is possible to trigger a glitch that lets Pac-Man swim in the air just before the section, which would let us skip everything for the entire rest of this level, but the only known way of getting this glitch to work is with a lengthy flutter in easy mode. Since easy mode is banned for this run though, I'm not allowing this glitch unless a way to trigger it in normal mode is discovered. That said, there definitely is potential to skip some or even all of the dots here, so take my minimum with a grain of salt. After this section, we have to hit this switch to gain access to the next section of the level, but that spawns a bunch of Pac dots in this area we now need to backtrack through. It's a little scary, but there are enough safe spots to just squeeze by. Right before the level ends, you have to bounce up some beatoing pads, and the very last one will send you right into a dot. Fortunately, you can land on top of the second to last one, and from there just jump straight up to a safe spot on the ledge above, allowing us to beat under pressure with a minimum of 30 points. This brings the total to 8140. Down the tubes. God damn, this level was a nightmare. I thought it was going to be an easy 0 points, but nope. Right at the start, we've got beatoing pads with Pac dots placed directly in their paths. There is some set dressing nearby we can use as platforms, but it's not even enough to skip the very first dot in the level. If you hold left off the first beatoing pad, you can land on top of the second, letting you jump to this box next to it, which can skip this dot here. Unfortunately, the box on this platform has an apple sitting on top of it, so that won't be of any use to us. We can just barely make it to the box on the left though, which can get us to this beatoing pad up on the right. From here, you can try and jank your way up to this box, but even if you did, I couldn't find any way of making use of it, no matter what I did, and trust me, I really tried. I just couldn't find a way to avoid these last 2 dots. 3 dots was the minimum I managed to get out of this first section with. This Galaxian placed shortly afterward requires a tricky landing on the corner of this platform to avoid, but even trickier is this butt bounce jump off this elevator you have to land while it's floating away from you. Well, now that I think about it, this might be possible with a regular jump. I never tried it. After all that we put up with at the start of the level, what could be better than another section just like it? We can jump from box to box to avoid the first 2 dots, but the next 2 seem to be forced, as once again there's no way of getting up to this platform from this box with such a low ceiling gimping our jumps. There's one last long jump over to a box after that, and then we head to the water section of this level. After hitting the switch, make sure to hug the right wall while falling down the shaft so you don't grab any of these dots. After that, just swim to the right, hugging the background wall to avoid the last few dots, remember to throw all the dots you picked up earlier, and down the tubes ends with a minimum of 25 points, bringing our total to 8165. I cannot stress enough just how painful it was to not only optimize these beetling sections, but to execute everything perfectly in a run. These jumps are so janky and awkward. I suspect some of the dots there might be able to be avoided with some serious beatoing jank, as there's a super precise position where you can butt bounce off the bottom of a beatoing without getting sent flying like normal, but I think it might be pixel perfect or something ridiculous like that, so I'll pass on grinding that out. Anyway, let's move on to the boss and finish up the factory world. Chrome Keeper is pretty easy, just dodge the attacks and make sure to only ever destroy the blue chests, as those always contain chrome pellets, which you need to damage the boss without taking damage on these pipes. Speaking of which, there are some dots placed on those pipes, so be careful of that. They're not too hard to avoid, but still. You can pretty easily get 2 hits off for each chrome pellet you get, so you can take them down in just 3 cycles. The bonus stuff that you get after beating the boss all spawns on the sides of the arena, so just stand in the middle until it's over. This boss gives you 5,000 points for defeating it, which is the minimum score here, bringing our total to 13,165. Finally, we get to move on to the last world of the game, starting with Ghostly Garden. This level is pretty easy up until this beatoing pad, which nearly sends us careening into a Pac dot. You can avoid these by jumping across from the bottom of this platform, but you'll still have to move downwards a little bit so that you don't grab the dot. The rest of these jumps afterwards aren't as bad since the coffins are moving and there's only 1 dot to avoid on each one. The rest of the level is pretty easy. Seriously, there's like almost nothing in your way here. Do be careful with butt bouncing around these bats though, they've got pretty big hitboxes. Right at the end of the level, the remake adds in a little castle that requires a elevator to climb up. I tried so many different methods to get onto this elevator early, but none of them really came close. That means we've got to grab this lemon to hit this switch. Just be careful to avoid these Pac dots that it spawns. Definitely don't ruin a good run at the very end of the stage.
Oh! This fucking moron, man!
Twice in a row.
Maybe it does have an earlier thing. Okay. Fucking come on, man!
Okay, be extra careful around these dots. There we go. After the fruit bonus, we finish Ghostly Garden with a minimum score of 900 points, bringing the total to 14,065. Creepy Catacombs is up next. This level starts off pretty easy, but soon gives us a bunch of coffins with dots on them. It's not too hard to get past if you line up the first jump correctly. Right after that is yet another required fruit door, this time needing an orange worth 500 points. The underground section is really easy. In fact, you don't even really have much of anything to worry about until right here. For some reason, this one platform doesn't have a dot on it, but I'm not complaining. Land precisely on the bottom right corner of the next platform and you can easily make it straight to the other side from there. The end of the level is just a short vertical elevator section away, and there are no dots or fruits to avoid there, so Creepy Catacombs has a minimum score of 600 points, bringing our total to 14,665. Here we are at the last level, Grave Danger. This little tombstone guy really tried his best, but nothing was going to stop me from finishing this challenge. At the end of this section is a fairly tricky jump from the bottom right corner of this platform all the way to the ledge over here, but it really wasn't that hard. Right after that, you can bounce on this metal enemy to get on top of this ledge without grabbing the banana. I haven't really mentioned this before, but this remake gave some of the enemies a metal coating that makes them impervious to any attacks unless Pac-Man is also chromed up, meaning we can safely butt bounce on top of these enemies for extra height. The jump after that can be a bit janky since you have to land on the very edge of this cloud with no sense of depth perception, but it's doable. Shortly afterwards, we come to the end section of the level. A melon door blocks our path to the end, but to get to the melon, we have to go to the underground section, and to unlock that, we need an apple to get to the switch in this door on the right. The apple is down and to the right, but there isn't anything in our way to it, so it's a modest 300 points. Once we head underground, we can see our prize just off in the background. To get there, however, we need to open yet another fruit door to spawn some coffins, requiring a pretty tight jump to grab this orange once we've hit all these switches. I was pretty proud of this jump, especially getting it first try like this. On the way back, though, I had an idea. I just kind of assumed there would be an invisible wall blocking the path to the melon from up here, but to my surprise, there wasn't. So I restarted the level and made my way back here where I made this jump. Alright, melon skip possible. With the orange door successfully skipped, all I had to do was make my way back up to the melon door and hop across the clouds to finish Grave Danger with a minimum score of 1500 points. The highest score of any non-boss level and the only level that requires 2 fruits. That brings our total score to 16,165 as we enter the final boss. This was a lot harder than I expected. On top of not having any extra health refills due to not being able to save any of Pac-Man's family throughout the challenge, there's a constant stream of infinitely respawning skeleton enemies to deal with. Not a huge deal on their own, but when killed, they drop a bunch of Pac dots for you to use as ammunition against Pac-Man. But okay, just don't kill the skeletons. We spent the whole game avoiding enemies, so what's the problem? Of course, Pac-Man's attacks will also kill the skeletons, so there's just gonna be a bunch of dots constantly floating around the arena that you have to dodge on top of the attacks from Pac-Man himself. The first phase can either be the easiest thing ever if Pac-Man chooses to spam the finger bullet attack over and over, or a total pain in the ass if he instead uses his rocket dash-a-punch. This attack swings the camera around, making it hard to dodge the attack, as well as keeping track of all the dots around you. Second phase is pretty easy if you just wait to grab the chrome pellet until after Pac-Man lands back in the arena, then you can just spam him with short rev rolls until the power-up runs out. With this strat, you can easily beat this phase in 2 cycles. The third phase is the most annoying part. You have to keep attacking his shoes to knock him down, but without access to the Pac-Dot projectile attack, you're forced to either rev roll into him, which risks potentially rolling into a Pac-Dot if you miss, or butt bounce on them, which is damn near impossible. Not to mention you have to keep dodging his shockwaves whenever he stomps on the ground. If you take too long to bring him down, he'll do a rev roll attack that can be really tough to dodge. Keep in mind that you have to do all 3 phases on 1 life with no heals, and even when you knock him down in this phase, he can still damage you by crushing you with his hand as he's falling.
There you go. Boss is over.
What?!
Okay. That's embarrassing.
There's nothing all too technical here in terms of the challenge's restrictions, but it is a damn hard boss feat to beat without any extra health or access to the dot throw. It is possible though, and after enough tries, I finally took him down. Pac-Man does eat a power pellet in this cutscene right at the end, but that doesn't give you any points, nor do the dots you pick up in the credits, thank God. Pac-Man awards you 10,000 points for defeating him, which is the only time in this challenge we get a free 1-up in the end of level bonus. Thanks. This brings our final total score to 26,165 points. Though if you take out the 5 points from that 1 dot in Space Race that should be skippable, the theoretical minimum, as far as I know, is 26,160 points. That may seem like quite a lot, but 21,000 of those points are forced on you for beating each of the game's bosses. Even if we were able to skip every single dot and fruit and bonus in every single level, that would still be the absolute minimum score, so take that out and we're left with 5,160 points scored in actual levels. In a game where you can get upwards of 1 million total points, I'd say just over 5,000 ain't bad. That concludes the challenge and this video. If you managed to further optimize any of these levels, do please leave me a comment about it, especially if you've got video proof I can watch. I'll definitely include any improvements listed in a pinned comment. If you enjoyed the video, do please leave it a like and subscribe if you're new. Those will help the channel out a ton. I can't promise I'll upload challenge videos like this super often, but I put just as much work into all my other content as I have into this one, so I do hope any new subs coming from this video will enjoy those too. I will do other challenge videos in the future when I have good unique ideas for them, but don't expect them all the time. Special shoutouts to my patrons here on the screen. If you want to support the channel directly, you can donate to my Patreon via the link in the description. I'll see you next month for my 2022 Game of the Year video. Thanks for watching.